Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much to the Global HR Forum for having an interest in Gallup and the research that we do. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to my whole tribe. I wanted to start, Dr. Kang, by saying what I think the biggest problem in the world is. And I think you know this very well in Korea. I sure know it as an American. But productivity is grinding down. And it's been grinding down for a full decade. As citizens of the planet, we're sort of going out of business. Now, that's kind of a miserable remark to open a lecture with, but I think I know a solution. But I just want to give you just a couple of important facts. You guys know what productivity is? I didn't know. I got some of our economists together, and I said, I don't understand what productivity is. And what it is, basically, it's GDP divided by per capita, divided by the number of people. So the world's GDP about 6 years ago was, let's say, 6%. And then it's gone 5.5, 5, 4.5, 4, 3. You can see where it's going, right? We're going out of business. The whole world's going out of business. So what's wrong? How could we be doing so well up to about 2008, just soaring, and now we're crashing? And we didn't just dip down and come back up. But what it means is per capita productivity for the whole world is in decline. It's sort of the other global warming. So you got the Earth not doing very well, but then you got productivity. That's what you and I are in charge of. We're in charge of productivity for the world. The way we're trying to solve it right now is we're trying to solve it with governments. We think you can fix it with fiscal tools. We think you can fix it with policies. The reason I think it's the biggest problem in the world is because the way the world has changed, human development, how we develop as humans, occurs in the workplace more than it does in society. It's a big sociological shift. So you see, if we don't have that right, this is going to keep grinding down. Productivity in Korea and in the United States of America, which I know best, they're both negative. The United States of America's productivity 5 years in a row has been 0. The United States of America has no problem bigger than that one. Before I tell you what I think the solution is, I want to tell you a little something about Dr. Kang, the guy that founded our company we were talking about. He was an academic. I would imagine the most famous academic in the history. He makes the list of 100 most influential Americans. His name is Dr. George Gallup. He makes the list with the real good list with George Washington and Ben Franklin and all those types on it. But as an academic, he just had one mission. And he had it in a great line where he said, if democracy is about the will of the people, somebody should go find out what that will is. And go talk to millions of people and write down what they want out of life. What will make your life meaningful? What are you going for in life? Then write that down. So you might say, Dr. Gallup, why did you want to know that? Here's what he said. He said that leaders, people like you and me, people like the president of Korea or Canada, Mexico, United States, Britain, whoever it might be, when they think they know what's on your mind and are wrong, so they're wrong about the basic premise of what a constituency, a society, all the employees in a company, whatever it is, when they're wrong about what they're thinking, the more you lead and the more strategies you make and the more policies you make, the worse you make the world. When you're dead wrong about what people want, what their dreams are, what's on the hearts and minds of a population of people. Our company was founded 80 years ago, so I can only go back 80 years. over 80 years of all that data, all those polls from 160 countries, what's the biggest discovery you've seen, or the most significant sociological shift? I'm going to tell you which one I think it is, because it has to do with us fixing the world and fixing productivity and fixing GDP growth. Growth is slowing. When we asked America 80 years ago what they wanted out of life, what they said is they wanted freedom. That was it. So if you and I were walking around Los Angeles or Dallas or Boston or Omaha or Kansas City or somewhere 80 years ago, that's what was on their minds. And then it shifted. And it shifted to peace. So after a while, Americans didn't want any more war. It's a big shift. The next one was family. And that brings you up until about 10 years ago. It's broad general. But I'm going to tell you now what it shifted to, and it might sound subtle when I first say it. I think it's the biggest sociological shift of the last 100 years. It went from freedom to peace to having a family to having a good job. And that's for the whole world. The will of the world has changed just in the last 10 years. Started a little bit before that. I'm almost a perfect person to be talking about this because I'm a baby boomer. So I'm an old guy. So if you have, I see millennials in the audience. You and I are exact opposites. Because when I was your age, I was in college and a university in the Midwest. And my only goal was to have a family. I wanted to marry a woman. I didn't have my eye on one yet, but I knew what I wanted. I wanted to, remember, want freedom, peace. I was in that one, in the family. I wanted to have 3 kids. I wanted to own my house. I wanted to have a yard with grass. And I wanted to have a station wagon, some kind of a car. That's all I wanted out of life. So if you said, Jim, what about your job? I would say, I don't care what my job is. I just want a salary of $20,000. That's what I wanted. So having a rich life was 100% about family and 0 about my job. And that overstates where baby boomers were. But you see, now you have this new population. They're already 40% of the world's workforce. Will soon be 50% and then 60%. It's just the opposite. For them, number one, their 100% is about having a fulfilling job and family second. It changes the whole fabric of 7 billion people. Because you see, my first thought was married, have kids, own a house. And theirs is get a good job where I can go do something meaningful so I have a meaningful life. 2 very different thoughts. So maybe we've built the workplace, for me. So if I come to work and I don't like my boss, I don't like the mission and purpose of the company, if you're my boss, you didn't care what I thought, and I didn't care what you thought, because it's just a functional position. Think how it's changed population and growth. Millennials get married much later in life, at least 10 years later than my generation, or they don't get married at all. So marriage rates in Korea and America and Canada and West Europe, they're the lowest they've ever been. Think about that. Marriage as an institution may be going away. Whoever thought that one would be disrupted? Here's another thing. Millennials have far fewer children. It's been cut in half. Or they don't have any children at all. So you see how it's changing the fabric of our... It's not a subtle change. It changes how we populate. But then it goes on and on. Remember I said I wanted to own a home? I did right away. Owned a home at 23. Millennials don't even want to own homes. Home ownership, at least in America, I didn't check that one on Korea, Lowest home ownership we've ever had, 250 years. Lowest home ownership. What's the point? The point is that the world's workplace is built still to serve me. And the workplace that we need is a brand new one that's very, very different, that serves millennials. I'm going to make a depressing remark. We are badly failing, badly failing. But I think it's fixable. There's 7 billion people in the world, and there's 5 billion adults. We built consistent sampling frames across 160 countries, so we get 98% of the population. And when we ask the 5 billion adults, what do you want most out of life? 3 billion of them say, I would give anything to have a good job. And a good job defined by the OECD or ILO is 35 hours a week with a paycheck from an organization with consistent work. That's it. Of the 3 billion, we said, well, do you have one? 1.2 billion said, I do. 1.8 billion don't have a full-time job with a paycheck. They have those informal jobs, which is kind of a cruel word for selling flowers in traffic or a bunch of crappy part-time work. There's only 1.2 billion good jobs in the world. Gallup asked them a few questions such as, do you believe the organization that you work for cares about your development? It's a soft question, but that's what millennials want almost more than anything. We asked, do you have a job where the task at hand you have a capacity to perform or it uses your strengths? Meaning that when you go to work, you have a job that you can do, and when you do it, it feels good. We call them engaged workers. We ask them, does the mission and the purpose of the company make you feel that your job is meaningful? Because remember, with them, if their job's not meaningful, their life's not meaningful. Not so with me. Now, but not back then. But if I had a graph up of, with 1.2 billion people across it, and you said, how many of them, as managers, are we delivering the great global dream? The answer is 15%. 15%. At the other end of the really miserable people that hate their boss, hate their job and all, it's 25%. So it means evil is winning over. If you said, how could we fix the world? I bet my job, I bet my stock, if we could just double that 15%, we could do that. If we could double the 15% to 30%, productivity would change. These are inspired people. They feel good, so you've done a good job managing them. These people over here hate the company and do anything they can to tear it down. This is a seriously negative bunch. They hate inspiration. They like to drive customers away. It's a good day when they've made a customer mad. This is a really bad group. Then you get about 15% in the middle. All the growth in your organization comes from just that 15%. They create new customers, they get new ideas, they run great new teams, they get projects done on time or early. Everything good happens in the 15%. You see the problem the world has? 15% is too small. It can't be smaller than the percent of people that are trying to tear it apart. So what we need to do is we need to figure out exactly what millennials want, and then we got to change our workplace, from what Jim Clifton wanted as an old guy back then. We got to change it to what millennials want. So that's how we're doing. So as a group of global managers, you and I, 15%. Korea is below 10%. It's very serious here. It's why you don't have growth or productivity. You're single digits. Employees in this country hate their jobs. And you want to be more specific, they hate their managers. You need to know that. But it's very fixable. It's very fixable. I've seen big organizations take 15%, ones that have 100, 200, 300,000 employees. They'll take the 15% when they go to work on it, and they'll drive it clear up to 60. That's what changes a culture. We got on I have a slide deck here of one slide. I've never done a slide deck before, so this is my deck, Dr. Kang. And I don't have anything against slide decks. I'm very proud I have a deck. Even though it's one, can you do that? Can you call it a deck if it's only one slide? Okay, all right. You guys, it was a huge research project. I mean, hundreds of my professionals, we said, what is it that the world wants in a job, and how is it different than old Jim Clifton, what he wanted with a job? So they had a report, and these guys can make reports that are 100, 200 pages easy. But I said to them, do not come into my office until you have it on one page. And they did. They worked and worked. You know, it takes a long time. It's easier to do a 100-page report than to do a one-page report. Reminds me what Abraham Lincoln said after the Gettysburg Address. He said that was most, you know, it's just only about that long. And he said, I would have made it even shorter if I would have had more time. Well, anyway, we got it on one page. The past. So me, I was just Mr. Paycheck. Just give me $20,000, maybe a company car, and you fulfilled the dreams of Jim Clifton for at least that part of it. It's so important. Remember, with a millennial, where their new will is a job, you have to do more than give them a paycheck, because you have to talk to them about the meaning of their job. Does it change society a little bit? How does it help customers? How do you link to the world? Am I changing the world a little bit? Because remember, what's different about this group compared to me is if their job doesn't have meaning, their life doesn't have meaning. Almost nobody in HR or CEOs don't know that. But that's a big sociological shift. The next one interested me, and I had to have him really carefully explain this to me. But we tend to try to create satisfaction. It's a very dangerous road to go down, because you see, the millennial isn't thinking satisfaction. So here's this young lady right down here. See, if she said to me, if I came to Gallup, what can you offer me? See, if I'm going down the satisfaction road, I would say, you'll like this, young lady. In the breaks in the morning and the breaks in the afternoon, I have volleyball courts set up outside the Gallup building in Washington, and you and your teammates can go play volleyball. Well, she says, I don't really like volleyball. I go, well, up on 5th floor, I've got ping pong tables. Does that get you anything? I don't really play. Okay. I'll get you a latte machine. You want a latte machine? Well, I don't really drink coffee. Okay. Free lunch twice. You want some free lunch? But you see where I'm going? It's a miss. Now, all that stuff would work for me, and it did. I had a job a long time. We had a bunch of stuff like that. We thought it was great. What she wants to know is, what can she become? She wants to know if I'll take the time to really develop her, because it's her life. It's not a job. So we got to go from satisfaction to development. This third one, and there's a big movement going on right now where Accenture and Ernst & Young and the Big Four, Price Waterhouse and Microsoft and General Electric, they're all pulling out performance reviews, forced rankings. They're changing all of it. I know why they're doing it, because they know Accenture is hiring 100,000, I don't know if anybody's from Accenture, hiring 100,000 millennials just this year. They knew that they had a workforce that was set for people like Jim Clifton, and they wouldn't be able to keep their stars. You got to have the new workforce. But if you said, what do you think that performance management movement's about? It's about the practice of management. Do you know Peter Drucker? Peter Drucker, when you're as old as I am, I actually knew him. But there was a way that you managed, and it was more command and control. So when I would manage this young lady, I would tell her that she was late today. I didn't like your report, and I don't know, and you talk to me about when you want some days off. That's just command and control. The big shift is that we're going to go from command and control to a culture of coaching. I'd bet everything I got on it. And so managers, as competent as they had to become on Six Sigma, Lean, TQM, whatever, so you get a black belt or you can't get promoted, now you're going to be able to differentiate yourself by how well I can coach her and actually develop her into something important. That's a big shift. My annual review, my ongoing conversations. There's a lady that was, there's a lady that's CEO of Deloitte. I don't know if it's Deloitte Americas or the whole thing. Ladies are never made CEOs of Big Four. I don't know, you got to come up through tax, I think it's a big break. But she wrote an article that's become very famous. You ought to Google it. But so she has a daughter in high school and one in college. And they're at home, and they're doing social networking and stuff. Anyway, she says to them, stop doing that and get to work on your projects. And they said, we are working on our projects. They're communicating with their teams. And then the next thing that she found out really scared her. The teachers were also in the conversations. And so as they were working, the teacher would say, you're missing the assignment. That's not what I want. You're too much about this. It's got to be more about this. So I don't like your title. The title implies this. That's not what you're doing. And so they're changing it on the fly. Well, and of course, in that conversation, it makes it a lot easier to get an A because you're getting instant, immediate feedback from your team leader, who's the teacher. Technology has changed millennials from what my generation was. But this really bright CEO, do you know what she thought to herself? Oh my gosh, they're getting instant, immediate feedback on the fly doing their projects from their team leader. They're going to come to Deloitte, and we're going to give them feedback once a year. But you see how important the change in? How wrong our premise is with annual reviews? You got to have some reviews, but without ongoing conversations, you can't be a great coach. It's a big sociological shift. I say sociological because I believe 100% human development now occurs in the workplace more than it does in general society. This last one, because we didn't really care, we put in competencies. We have competencies at Gallup, so fine, but there's good competencies and bad competencies. But what I do with this young lady is I give her some, and I find gaps, right? You know what gaps are? It's what's wrong with her. So I say, I found some things I talked to her about. Then I make a whole plan on how she can improve on these things I know about her that are wrong. I have some math to prove that she's not good at this. Then I call her into my office. I go, hey, I found some more things that are really wrong with you, and let's do this. You see what's happening? As her boss, I'm the world's leading living authority on what's wrong with her. Her relationship with me and the organization focuses on her weaknesses. We had a legacy psychologist at Gallup, died 12 or 15 years ago. It's become really famous after death. But he made a discovery that weaknesses never turn into strengths. There's not one body, there's no material anywhere where you can prove that weaknesses turn into strengths. But what he found is if you figure out what her strengths are and then build her plan around her strengths develop infinitely throughout her whole life. So it's just another thing that we've got wrong. But people like me didn't care. Millennials do. So when millennials come through, you need to have some kind of a process. We have something called StrengthsFinder, Clifton Strengths, that we use on, we've used it on 15 million employees around the world. It's just booming everywhere. Probably some people in here have taken it. But we've got to change our focus from trying to fix weaknesses to building strengths. I'm just going to suddenly stop. But I just wanted to leave you with the last two things are just the closing. Why am I doing this? What's the switch? For the old man, it was just my job. For the millennial, it's my life. I'm very concerned about where the world is going right now because of the slowed growth. It's increasing a little bit, but see, the problem is it's increasing at a decreasing rate. That's the simple math. So it means you go to zero and then to negative numbers. What I wanted to leave you with is, I don't think we should look to governments to fix this. They can make things worse or they can make things better. I think we've got to do this ourselves with our own hands. And I think if you and I don't fix it, I don't think anybody else is going to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today. I will start by confessing something to you. As you said, I'm head of a teaching and training institution, and still having to prepare the next generation for a future I know very little about. This may have been true in the past. Imagine what was taught in schools at the beginning of the 20th century. What powers were influent at the time, which industries were relevant, and what to expect. Who had foreseen 2 world wars, the rise of the United States, the fall of colonial powers, or the division of Europe? I was born in a continent divided in two by the Iron Curtain, where people from Western Europe could hardly travel to the east, and where people from Eastern Europe were not allowed to travel to the west. This sounds familiar in this part of the world to many of you. Still, in the late 1980s, in just a few months, the Berlin Wall was down, then the Iron Curtain disappeared, and the USSR collapsed. The European Union enlarged to become the largest and most integrated regional organization. More and more countries pressed to enter the EU, from Ukraine to Turkey. There seemed to be no limit to the attractiveness of this bold political and economic construction. And then, suddenly, a few months ago, one of the most prominent members of the EU, the UK, voted to leave the Union. Whether rational or not, the decision was widely unexpected, maybe even by Gallup. The level of preparation of the UK for the consequences of the Brexit is so low that no one really knows how long the process will take and what its consequences will be, both for London and for the rest of Europe. So, in 40 years, we have traveled from a durably divided Europe to a reunified continent, an enlarged and more integrated EU, and now the departure of one of its most important members. The question is, how were these topics taught along the way? What was presented once as certainties, which turned out to be false some years later? So yes, indeed, it has always been difficult to teach and train the next generation for your future we know little about. But this assertion has never been as strong as nowadays. Think about it. 60% of professions which will be practiced in 2030 don't yet exist, at least according to a survey released in 2015 by the American consulting firm WagePoint. As breathtaking as it sounds, the move has already started. Some of the most sought-after jobs of our decade did not exist in 2000. Do you believe that at the turn of the millennium, employers were looking for sustainable development experts, mobile apps developers, cloud computing technicians, data miners, or community managers, and could hardly find them. It makes it hard to guess which will be the new professions of 2030. Wage point suggestions are digital architects, elderly well-being consultants, nanomedics, avatar managers, vertical farmers. They may be right or not. Meanwhile, some professions may soon have completely disappeared. We used to ask travel agencies to organize our trips abroad. Now that we travel much more than before, we simply rely on websites for recommendations coming from other travelers to choose our hotels and air companies. Even existing jobs are changing dramatically due to the influence of three main factors: technical progress, globalization, and new expectations from citizens and customers alike. I won't comment much on technical progress, because first, I'm not an expert, and second, because we all see the impact on our lives and on the rapid change of business models and job expectations of this technical progress. The digital revolution creates new opportunities, new jobs, and destroys older ones at a very fast pace. We all know about the impact of internet on professions like taxi drivers. We suspect that the consequences of the use of 3D printers are still widely underestimated. We try to get a sense of the opportunities and risks brought to us by the R&D on artificial intelligence. We haven't yet figured out what the contrary of technical progress, something like technical regression, really means for our societies. But it might well be underway due to the effects of global warming and a foreseeable scarcity in hydrocarbons, as well as in some food products in the coming decades. For example, we would never have thought that Bob Dylan could have received the Nobel Prize for Literature, and still, he told us long ago, the times, they are changing. I may comment somewhat more on globalization, because when we think we know what it is about, especially here in Asia, when we think about globalization, we think openness of trade markets, accelerated circulation of goods and services. Let me talk a little bit, once again, about Europe. In Europe, what we see right now is somewhat different. We start to face the consequences on our territories of conflicts and crises happening elsewhere. Think about the arrival of migrants coming mostly from Africa, the Middle East, or Afghanistan, and the political reactions that this arrival triggers. Let us be frank, refugees and migrants are not that many, and we are a rich and aging continent. They come looking for a better future and could be welcome. Frankly speaking again, our populations don't see it that way. There is a growing fear that people from different cultures, different religions, will change the identity of all countries in Europe. And this fear is fed by another kind of globalization, the global terrorist threat. If you add the idea that climate change might push more people to migrate from impacted regions to more protected ones, the sense of globalization tomorrow might become very different to that of today. Already, drug traffickers, human traffickers, smugglers, hackers, terrorists pay little attention to classical state borders. They are old professions turned new. We obviously struggle hard with few results to fight them. In some parts of the world, even in some parts of our developed countries, underground economies spread just as fast or even faster than legal ones. I would also like to stress how much new expectations of citizens and consumers alike transform traditional professions. These new expectations take advantage of the avalanche of information customers and citizens receive through a multitude of media. Consumers want transparency, accountability, and they have new tools to achieve their objectives. Boycott of goods, depending on their origin, their ingredients, or the working conditions of workers who produced them, are only starting and may well spread. Social and environmental clauses are scrutinized by investors to make sure that businesses don't risk being depreciated in the eye of their customers. This evolution has not yet reached the poorest part of the population, which cannot afford to make a distinction on staple commodities other than related to their price. But the rise of a large middle class in many emerging economies and the change in consumer habits in the developed world follow the same path towards more demanding requirements. This can apply similarly to the attitude and expectation of citizens toward their governments and civil service. Better informed, used to the quality of service of private providers such as mobile phone operators, citizens consider their public services with a new eye and less indulgence. They expect transparency, efficiency. They reject corruption, conflicts of interests, and their willingness to pay taxes depends on the quality of service they witness. Furthermore, citizens tend to reject decisions taken top-down without being duly consulted and associated. Building new dams, new airports, new wind turbines becomes harder than it used to be due to the mobilization of citizens' associations. There is little doubt that these changes will have numerous consequences on the skills which are expected from new generation entering the labor market. Adaptability, openness, capacity to interact are not only human qualities which favor a balanced personal life. They have become very much looked after soft skills, which one should develop during his or her training years. It goes with the capacity to embrace not only the effects of technological changes, but the evolution of the society, which necessitates a solid understanding of where we come from and what might be the lessons of history, geography, and social sciences together. Talking about students entering the working market, do you realize to what extent the number of students reaching higher education is booming? There are almost twice as many students in the world this year than in 2000. We went from 100 million students in 2000 to 196 in 2012, according to the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. Asia accounts for 66% of the total increase. Mass education is without hesitation the biggest challenge we all face. It's an exciting one. Never in our planet's history has there been such a proportion of young generations reaching higher education. It's a fantastic opportunity. One of the vectors of this transformation comes from the access to education for young people coming from the emerging countries. In 2000, there were 1/4 less students in the BRICS than in developed countries. This year, they account for 3/4 more. But beside this fantastic opportunity, new questions arise regarding the business model of higher education. Who should pay for it, invest in it, design it, and manage it? In emerging economies, about 13% of household income goes to education, whereas it's only 2% in the US or the UK. But money goes first to primary and secondary education, much less to higher education in emerging countries. The key question becomes, in developed countries and emerging countries alike, whether public spending, tuition fees, or private donors finance the universities required by the rising number of students. There is no easy answer to that question. Public spending faces limits, and universities are getting poorer due to budget restrictions. It's very hard to get more public money dedicated to students' educations, whereas money for research may still be available. The raise in tuition fees creates other kinds of dilemma when students' debts surge in a number of countries. Everywhere, we have to consider education in general and higher education in particular for what it is, a collective investment in the future of one's country's human resources, which deserve appropriate financial support. Providing quality education to a rising number of students is thus a challenge. No less of a challenge is to find a way to open the most selective educative and training pathways to greater diversities. I come from a country where these most selective pathways are embodied by what we call grandes écoles rather than university. The National School of Administration, which I'm heading, is one of them, as well as the École Polytechnique, whose chairman is present at this conference, and some others. They stand at the top of our higher education system in terms of prestige and professional perspective for their alumni. Access to these very selective schools is based on meritocracy. Competitive exams open to candidates irrespective of their gender, age, social or ethnic origin. The only relevant criteria of selection are based on talent. The system may be somewhat different in other countries, but the idea that a limited number of very selective institutions provide students with major job opportunities is still widespread. Therefore, the question is, do we rely on pure meritocracy, offering every talent a chance to be selected, or do we favor some sort of social reproduction where sons and grandsons of today's elite have a better chance to navigate the system than newcomers? In most countries, the answer is alarming. Let us simply consider the absence of women in the most selective pathways, whereas they count for more than half of the world population, and they generally outperform boys in primary and secondary education. Losing them along the way amounts to accepting a major waste of talent, of money, and of opportunities for growth. Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, perfectly understands it, but he faces strong resistance. More generally, to foster and to implement equal opportunity policies that really work is a huge challenge and an urgent one. I will address it later, and I consider it key because traditional elites are more and more decried. One might argue that criticizing the elites is pretty often suspicious, as it comes from demagogues and populists alike. This might well be true, but we should avoid inviting criticism by making sure that we do live up to our principle of openness and equal opportunity. Yet another challenge faces each and every teaching and training institution. We are knowledge factories and knowledge providers, but we face an overwhelming sort of competition. Thanks to the internet, knowledge is everywhere and easily accessible. Why should we gather students in a classroom to listen to lectures they can watch on the web? What is the role of libraries, where paper books account for a decreasing part of the learning material students need to get? And going from knowledge to know-how. How do we transmit know-how when we take it for granted that it will soon be outdated? The notion of transmission itself takes less and less space in our syllabi. Some skills remain valid. We have long lived with the idea, made popular in the 18th century, that an honest man, as we would call him in France, was able to embrace most of the relevant knowledge of his time and take enlightened or informed decisions. Who would believe it today, considering the complexity and variety of opportunities and threats provided by the digital revolution? Isn't there a risk that political and business leaders behave like the characters of Plato's allegory of the cave and take their decisions according only to the shadows of the upcoming reality? The number and importance of these challenges must encourage us, teaching and training institutions, but also students and workers from the new generation, to adopt new approaches. Let me share with you some of my personal convictions based on what I experiment and implement as the head of a renowned training institution. First conviction: complexity requires diversity. Today, neither businesses nor institutions can afford to waste talents. They have to attract and keep the best and the brightest. It is their job, but also the mission of training institutions, to detect talents, attract them, train and accompany them towards success, which means that equal opportunity policies are more necessary than ever, considering gender, social, and ethnic biases, which dominate recruitment and selection processes approximately everywhere. Every single student must be certain that according to his or her talents, his or her ambitions, he or she will find a way to make it flourish. We have to act at an early age to fight against such phenomena as self-censorship. There are no such jobs as made for old white male only. That being said, the moment you hear about jobs and the way to join professions you know little about is key. The earlier, the better. Primary school is the place to fight against unconscious biases, gain self-confidence, and improve social skills. Secondary school is the place where the diversity of talents must be detected and welcomed. There is nothing like an order of precedence between, for instance, craft industry and high-tech, social sciences and math, or there should not be, according to job opportunities in each and every category. But education goes often with ideology. Therefore, the idea that mass education should equal massive efforts to teach all students the same curriculum in the same format is a widespread mistake, leading to widespread failure. It is crucial that every single student is given the chance to make his or her own choice according to his or her specific type of talent. Methods exist which focus on knowledge and skills and their objective evaluation and avoid unconscious biases and prejudices. They must be widely adopted and implemented as early as at secondary school level onwards. Educational guidance is also of the essence. How can you choose your study path when you know little about where it leads to? We should all participate fully in the effort to make our institutions known, but also to make various professions better understood. Otherwise, the winners of the system are the insiders' sons. In most of the selective study pathways, you find an abnormal rate of teachers and professors' sons and daughters. This amounts to a cultural insiders' dealing, and this is not acceptable. In ANA, we have focused very much on this notion of diversity, which lays the foundation of our meritocracy system. Our recruitment process includes a specific training of the juries about unconscious biases, objective assessment of listed competences and skills, permanent evaluation of the non-discriminatory nature of our selection. We provide specific preparation for our exams to students coming from underprivileged backgrounds, helping them to meet implicit social expectations from future employers. I don't share the idea that the coming word is about more and more competition between individuals to survive, as I read in the concept note of our conference. I'm fully convinced that the challenges ahead call for more cooperation, more collaborative approaches, a higher value for sharing than for owning goods and services, and this has already started. But if you want to foster innovation and creativity, we have to go one step further and encourage experiments. A lab mindset should not be limited to experimental sciences, but may be expanded to each and every discipline. One of the most important lessons from experiments is failure. To fail is the best way to learn. Our teaching systems must include failure as part of learning processes. Let's go back for a while to diversity. Diversity is not only for students. If complexity requires diversity, one must apply the recipe to teaching and training institutions as well. This includes diversity in the faculty. Diversity is also about bridging the gap between the private and the public sector. I am the director of a senior public management school. That is to say that my students will join the public administration and meet the specific and complex requests from their fellow citizens regarding public services. Business schools may be completely different. They train students to become private company managers. Still, I know no place on earth where the public and the private sectors don't interact. You may decide as a student that you have a preference for the former or the latter, but ignoring how to improve interactions between the two simply makes you, the institution and the country you work for, weaker. Partnership between different types of schools and universities are key as well. Beyond a transdisciplinary approach, we have to favor more contacts and interactions between teaching and training institutions which focus on very different specialties to create innovative teaching. Knowing what is desirable is as important as knowing what is feasible. Ethics is of utmost importance for disciplines like medicine, artificial intelligence, or nanotechnologies. Philosophy trains the brain better than Sudoku to embrace complex issues. History tells us that you can hardly know where you go if you ignore where you come from. There is obviously room for improvement in the way we organize students' curriculum. They learn much more than in the past by traveling much more abroad, which is a very positive asset. But we all know from experience that these years off are more about coming of age than going to school. There is probably something more to be done in order that students, whatever their field of specialty becomes, constantly ask themselves questions related to culture and liberal studies. Of course, training is a lifelong process, and there are things that you don't learn at school. Still, a working life is not always as balanced as it should be, and time for reflection does not come so easily. My last message would be this one. You only live your youth once. Live it fully, comprehensively, enthusiastically. Don't be afraid of the future. It belongs to you. Make it what you long for, not what you're terrified of. A famous thinker, Antonio Gramsci, advised to combine pessimism of the mind with optimism of the will. Please focus on the latter. Thank you.